Eliza Hartwell was 41 years old in the spring of 1875, and she had been a widow for 10 of those years. Her husband, Thomas, had gone north with a Georgia regiment in the second year of the war and had not come back from it. There was no grave. There was a single letter, the last one he sent, and she kept it in the front of the family Bible, and the edges of it had gone soft as cloth from handling. She lived 2 miles out from Clarksville, on a road that flooded every March. The house was small and clean and quiet, and she kept it that way on purpose, because quiet was the one thing she could still arrange. In the evenings, the only sounds were the stove ticking as it cooled, and the creek at the bottom of the field, and she had lived inside those 2 sounds so long she had stopped hearing them. What she had that almost no one else in the county had was letters and reading. In Habersham County in 1875, most people could not read. The war had taken the men and the years after it had taken the schools, and a literate woman who would sit at her table and read your son's letter aloud and write your answer in a clean, steady hand was worth the walk out to the flooded road. They paid her in eggs, in cordwood, in coins when they had them. She kept account of all of it in the back of her diary, in columns, the way her father had taught her. So the mail of the town moved through her house. That is the thing to understand first. A boy gone to Atlanta for work, a daughter married off to Tennessee, a brother who had drifted west and wrote twice a year. Their words came to Eliza Hartwell's table, and she read them out to people who sat across from her with their hats in their hands, and then she wrote back whatever those people told her to say. She was, for 9 years, the voice the town used when it needed to speak to the people it had lost. She was good at it. She was patient with the old ones who needed a line read 3 times. She did not repeat what she read to anyone who had not paid to hear it. The diary is full of small kindnesses, recorded without any sense that they were kind. A widow's pension claim filled out for free. A death notice softened before she read it aloud to the mother it was meant for. Of one such morning she wrote only, "I read it gentle, and she took it gentle, and that is all I can do for them now." A morning in that house ran the same way for years. Someone would come up the road after the worst of the mud had dried, and knock, and sit at the table with a folded letter they could not read, and wait while she read it twice, once through to herself, then aloud, slowly, so they could hold it. A mother from the next farm came most of one winter to hear her son's letters from Atlanta, where he had gone to work the rail yards, and Eliza read the same few lines over and over, because the woman wanted them more than she wanted news. "Tell her I am eating well, and the work is steady," one of them said, and the mother nodded at that line every time as though it were the first time. Then Eliza took down whatever answer the woman wanted sent, and folded it, and the woman pressed a few eggs on her, and walked back down the road, lighter than she came. For 9 years, the work was only ever that, and it was good work, and she was the only one for 2 days' ride who could do it. The woman who had done the work before her was named Hannah Reeves, and Hannah Reeves was 74 that spring, and going blind. It was Hannah who had taught Eliza the trade years back, when Eliza was newly widowed and needed something to do with her hands and her grief. And it was Hannah who came out to the flooded road that March, the last time she would ever make the walk, to hand the work over for good. The 2 of them sat at the table most of an afternoon. Hannah could no longer see well enough to read, but she could still talk, and she went through all of it. Who paid and who did not? Which families were not to be read to in front of each other? Where the dead letter notices went when a letter could not be delivered? The smell of the woman stayed in the house afterward, Eliza wrote. Wood smoke and clove. The clove she chewed for a bad tooth. And then, near the end, Hannah Reeves told her the other thing. Eliza wrote it down that night, almost word for word, because she wrote everything down. I am going to give it to you the way she wrote it. She told me that once in a long while, a letter comes that has no postmark on it and no town of sending, only a name and this road, and that those do not come through the post office, and I am not to ask how they come. She said, when one of those arrives, I am to burn it before the third night, before I break the wax, and if I cannot bring myself to burn it, then I am to leave it shut and never, ever answer it, not by letter and not aloud, for the dead do not want to be answered. They want to be let go, and a letter answered is a door held open. She said, answer even one of them, and it has your name from your own hand, and once it has your name, it will never stop, and then they will all begin to write to you. And she said it the way the doctor says a thing he has said too many times, not frightened, only tired. And then she asked me for water, and we did not speak of it again. Eliza Hartwell did not believe a word of it. She wrote that too, in the same entry, in a steadier hand than the rest. She wrote that Hannah Reeves was old and going blind and had buried 2 husbands and 3 children, and that a mind carrying that much loss will make ghosts out of bad eyesight and a draft under the door. She is a kind old woman who has lost too much, Eliza wrote, and grief has gotten into her like damp into a wall. But she kept reading one line back to herself, she said, because she could not make it sit right. The dead do not want to be answered. She did not know yet why it stayed with her. There is one more thing from that spring, and she set it down without any weight on it, the way you note a thing you do not yet know to be afraid of. The morning after Hannah Reeves walked back down the road for the last time, Eliza noticed that the clock on her mantel had stopped. It was her mother's clock, and it had run for 30 years. She wound it, and it would not start. It will not take winding, she wrote, so I have let it be. She left it where it was, and she did not think about it again until much later, when she went looking, and found that every clock in the house had stopped at the same minute, and that she had not heard a single one of them tick since the day the work became hers. For 6 weeks after that, nothing else happened. The house stayed as quiet as it had always been quiet. Then the quiet ended, and it ended with a letter that came through a locked door. The first letter without a postmark came in May. Eliza found it on the floor inside her own front door, which had been shut and latched all night. It had a name on the front and the road, in a careful hand, and no town, and no mark from any post office. The name on it was not hers. It was the name of a Pell boy who had died at a place called Spotsylvania in 1864, whose mother still lived 3 miles down the valley and had not been told 11 years on that a body was never found. Eliza sat at her table with the letter in front of her and did exactly the thing Hannah Reeves had told her not to do. She thought about it. She was a practical woman, and practical women do not burn a thing without first deciding what it is. She held it to the window and could see nothing through the paper. She turned it over and looked at the seal, a plain disk of dark wax with a thumbprint pressed into it, and she noticed and wrote down, "The print wants the tip of the finger, as though pressed by a hand that had lost it." She did not think much of that then. A great many men had come home from the war missing parts of their hands. She put the letter on the shelf above the stove. She did not burn it. She told herself she would carry it to the Pell house in the morning and let the mother decide. That night she heard it. She wrote that she woke near 2 in the morning to a sound she took at first for wind in the stovepipe, a low sound, rising and falling, with a shape to it. She lay still and listened, and understood that it was not the stovepipe. It was coming from the shelf. It was coming from inside the letter, and it was a man's voice, and it was saying one word over and over, and after a while she made the word out. "It is saying mother," she wrote. "Only that, the one word, and it will not stop." She did not open it. She wrote that she got up and stood in the dark by the cold stove and listened to a dead man say one word for the better part of an hour, and then it stopped, and she went back to bed and did not sleep. In the morning the letter was just a letter, quiet, sealed, ordinary. She walked it down to the Pell House, and she did not read it, and she did not say what she had heard, and she watched the old woman take it and hold it, and not open it either, because the old woman could not read and had no one left to read it to her. Eliza offered. The old woman shook her head and held the letter to her chest. "I know his hand," she said, "and that is his hand, and I will not have it opened, for as long as it is shut, he is still writing it." Eliza walked home and told herself it was grief and a draft and an old woman's notion, and she almost believed it again, the way you can almost believe a thing in daylight on a dry road. The second letter came a week later. The same hand, no postmark, on the floor inside the latched door. A different name, a different voice that night, from the shelf. This is where she should have gone to the post office, and she did. And that is the first thing that did not work. The postmaster at Clarksville was a man named Elias Stroud, 50-some years old, careful, church-going, not a man given to nonsense. Eliza brought him both letters and laid them on his counter and asked him plainly how mail was reaching her house with no postmark and no town of sending. She did not tell him about the voices. She was not a fool. Stroud examined them a long time. He told her there was no stamp, no cancellation, no record, and that nothing without those things had passed through his office. Mail does not move in this country without an office to move it, he told her. And he said it more than once, and the more he said it, the less certain his voice got. He turned the second one over and looked at the seal and went quiet. Then he handed them both back across the counter and said the last part low, so the men by the door would not hear. "Take these out of my office, missus," he said, "and were they mine, I would burn them." And he would not look at her while he said it. She wrote, walking home, that Elias Stroud knew something, not all of it, but something. He had seen that seal before. She did not know yet that he had received one himself, years earlier, and that what he had done about it was the reason a careful church-going man would not meet a widow's eyes across his own counter. There is a thing in the record from that same week, and it is not from her. Among the county's loose post office papers, there is a dead letter notice in Elias Stroud's hand, dated late May of 1875, listing the mail he was holding as undeliverable, and at the bottom of it, in the same careful print, a line that does not belong on such a form. 3 received. Bearing no mark of origin, it reads. Refused and returned to sender. Sender unknown. Returned where, the form does not say. A letter with no town of sending has nowhere to be returned to. Stroud filled the line in anyway, the way a man writes a thing down so he can say later that he followed the procedure, even when he knows there is no procedure for what he is holding. By the end of May, there were 5 letters on the shelf above her stove. She had read none of them, and every one of them spoke at night, one at a time, never together, always a different voice, Always the same kind of word. A name, a place, a mother, a please. The house, which had held two sounds her whole widowhood, now held a third, and it came after midnight, and it came from the shelf. She counted them each morning. 5 became 7, 7 became 9, and in her diary, for the first time, she copied the warning out again, word for word from the spring. And under it, she drew a single line. And under the line, she wrote the date she expected the third night of the next one to fall, the night by which the old woman had said it must be burned. She had begun, without quite admitting it, to keep the watch Hannah Reeves had told her to keep. "I do not believe it," she wrote at the bottom of that page. "I am only keeping the dates so that I will have proof later that there was nothing to it." The letter that broke her was the 9th. It came like the others, on the floor inside the latched door, the same hand, no postmark. But the name on the front of this one was Thomas Hartwell, her husband. 10 years dead, no grave. The last of his real letters gone soft in the front of her Bible. She held it a long time before she could make her hands steady. She wrote that she knew, the way the Pell woman had known, that it was his hand on the front of it. "It is his," she wrote, and nothing else on the line. And then she wrote the date down, very carefully, because the third night of this one was the only thing that mattered now. Eliza had read the warning so many times by then that she could not unhear it. "Burn it before the third night. Do not break the wax, and never, under any circumstance, answer it." She put it on the shelf with the others and waited for the dark. And that first night, the letter spoke, and the voice in it was Thomas. And it was not saying a name or a place. It was saying her name. It said Eliza, just that, in his voice, the way he had said it across a table for the 11 years they were married. And it said it again and again until the light came up. Hannah Reeves had told her exactly what answering one would do. Answer even once, and it has your name, and it never stops. Eliza knew the words. She had copied them out in her own hand. She also knew that the voice on the shelf was the only one that had said her name in 10 years. On the second night, she carried the letter down to the creek at the bottom of the field to be rid of it before the third night came. She wrote that the water was high and cold and loud with the spring melt, and that she stood on the bank with the letter in her hand and could not open her fingers. "I could not let it go into the water," she wrote, "because the water was loud, and I did not want him in the cold and the noise." She carried it back up to the house and set it on the shelf, and that was the end of trying. She understood by then, she wrote, that she was no longer keeping the warning. She was bargaining with it. On the third night, exactly the window the old woman had named. Not a day early and not a day late, Eliza Hartwell sat down at her table at 2 in the morning, with the voice saying her name from the shelf, and she took down a clean sheet of paper, and she answered it. She wrote down what she wrote to him. It was 4 words. "I am still here." She did not break the seal on his letter. She wanted that understood, and she wrote it twice. That she never opened a single one of them. That she had kept that much of the warning. But she answered it. She held the door open. The diary changes after the third night. The hand stays the same. It is hers all the way through. That was confirmed against her pension claim. There is no second writer, and that was the first thing checked against the record. But the entries get shorter, and they stop being about the town. The letters stopped coming through the door after that. They started coming another way. She wrote that she would set out a clean sheet to answer one, and turn to trim the lamp, and turn back. and the sheet would already be answered in her own hand, in words she did not remember writing. She wrote that the count on the shelf kept rising, and that she was no longer sure she was the one adding to it. She tried once to burn the whole stack in the stove. This is the second thing that did not work. They will not take the fire, she wrote that night. They go black at the edge and lie in the coals whole, and the noise tonight is the worst it has been. In the morning the letters were back on the shelf, dry, sealed, cool to the touch. She went then to the one place left to go. Elias Stroud, the postmaster, would not let her past his porch. She stood in his yard and asked him what he had done about his, because she knew by then that he had had one, and the things he told her she wrote down on the walk home, while she could still remember them. He told her he had answered his too, years back, a letter in his dead brother's hand, one line, and that the writing had not stopped for 9 months, and that it had only stopped when he did the thing he was now begging her to do. "You stop answering, missus," he told her. "No matter whose voice, no matter whose name, and you let it right into the dark and you never write back. And it tires, and it stops. But you must be stronger than it is, for longer than you can stand to be." This is the third thing that did not work. Not because the method was wrong, because Eliza Hartwell could not do it. She wrote it plainly, near the bottom of a page, in the steadiest hand in the whole diary. She wrote that Elias Stroud had stopped answering his brother, and the writing had stopped, and his brother was gone now, truly gone, the door shut for good. And she wrote that she was not going to do that. He had a brother to lose a second time, she wrote. I have a husband, and no grave, and no child, and no one living who says my name, and I will hold this door open the rest of my life, before I close it on him twice. I read that page 3 times before I understood that it was not the horror talking. It was the loneliness. She knew exactly what she was choosing. She chose it anyway. After that, the diary is mostly the count. She stopped writing about the town. The columns of eggs and cordwood and coins end in the summer of 1875 and do not start again. The neighbors kept coming out to the flooded road with their letters, and at first she read to them, and then she did not answer the door. A girl who had come most weeks to have her brother's letters read wrote decades later a short account of those months, and it is the only outside witness to what the house became. She said the widow had grown thin and would speak to her through the shut door. She said the house had gone cold even in August, a wet cold, like a root cellar. And she said the last time she walked out there, she heard the widow talking inside, steady and low, not stopping for an answer. She was talking the way you talk to someone in the room with you, the woman wrote, and there was no one in the room with her. The letters filled the house. Eliza wrote that she no longer set out sheets to answer them, because it made no difference, because they were answered whether she wrote or not. The stack on the shelf had become stacks, on the table, in the box under the bed, and she had stopped opening the front room, because that was where they put themselves now. And she wrote the thing she could not get past, the thing she circled back to, and could not explain, and finally stopped trying to. They all have my name on them now, she wrote. Everyone. They have stopped writing to their mothers. They are writing to the one who answers. The same careful hand that had been her husband's was hers now, and every sealed letter in the house was addressed to Eliza Hartwell, in Eliza Hartwell's own hand, and not one of them had been opened. She sealed the front room in the fall. She wrote that she nailed the door, and the diary does not say from which side, and that omission is the line that stays. The voices, by her account, no longer came one at a time. She does not describe them In 100 pages, she never once describes what she hears in any way that would let you picture it. She only ever writes down what it costs her. A night she could not stand, a morning she could not get warm, a week she did not remember. The closest she comes is one line: late. After a night she marks only with the word again. It is all of them now, she wrote, and they have stopped asking for their mothers, and they are asking me the same thing I asked him, and I cannot answer all of them at once, and I am so tired, and I will not stop. The count in the margin by then is past 200. She was not found for 3 days. A neighbor noticed the chimney cold in weather that should have had it smoking and sent for the county. The clerk who went in wrote the inventory that survives, a plain list of a poor woman's goods, and in the middle of it, with no more weight than the rest, it records 211 letters, sealed, present throughout the dwelling, none opened, and notes that the front room had been nailed shut and that the letters were found in it as well, though the door had not been opened in months. He does not say how the letters got into a room that had been sealed since the fall. He does not seem to have asked. Eliza Hartwell was buried in the Clarksville Town Cemetery, beside a marker for a husband who was not under it. The letters were boxed by the county and held, the way unclaimed property was held, and in the end, the box went where such boxes went, which was the dead letter office. This is a real place, and it is the part that will not sit quietly. The dead letter office in Washington was where the country sent the mail it could not deliver, letters with no address it could find, or no person left to find. Clerks there opened the undeliverable, looking for some line inside that might send it home. 211 sealed letters, addressed to a dead woman in a county that no longer claimed her, would have gone to exactly that office, to be opened by exactly those clerks whose whole work was to open what no one else would. The clerks there opened thousands of letters a day, by hand, hunting a name or a town or anything that might place a piece of mail. What they could not place they destroyed in lots, and the few oddities worth keeping went into a small museum of curiosities the office actually maintained. A room of things found inside undeliverable mail, where 211 sealed letters in a single box would have gone. The office's own records no longer say. The record of what they found inside, if they opened them, did not survive. The office burned, in part, more than once. What survives is the county inventory, the diary, and 2 short codas that could be run down, and those come first, and then the last thing, and then we are done. Elias Stroud, the postmaster, lived another 22 years, careful and church-going to the end. His daughter said only one strange thing about him, in a letter of her own, long after. "My father would never let a letter sit in the house overnight," she wrote. "Not one, not even a bill. He opened everything the day it came, and burned what he did not keep, and a sealed envelope left out after dark would put him in a state none of us understood." The girl who had heard the widow talking through the door grew up and married and moved to Athens and lived a long, ordinary life. She told her own children, near the end of it, that she had once known a woman who could read, who read letters for the whole county, and that the woman had died alone of a winter that came in August. Her daughter wrote that the old woman kept a lamp burning all night, every night, to the end of her life, and when we asked her why, she only said she did not like a dark room with paper in it. Hannah Reeves, who gave the warning, died the winter after Eliza did, blind and quiet, in a bed in town. She had buried 2 husbands and 3 children, and the work of 40 years, and the people who sat with her said she went easy, and said almost nothing, except that more than once in her last days, she asked whether anyone had remembered to burn the letters, and was told yes, and was satisfied, and slept. Here is the last thing. The county inventory lists 211 letters. The diary, in Eliza Hartwell's own hand, in an entry written the week before she died, gives a different count. She writes that there are 210 in the house, and that she has set the last one aside, separate from the rest, because it is the only one not addressed to her. It is addressed in her hand, she writes. The careful hand, the one that had been her husband's and become hers. But the name on the front of it is not her name. It is a woman's name she did not know, and a road she had never heard of, in a county to the south. She writes that she does not know who the woman is. She writes that she will not answer this one, and will not send it, and will not burn it, because I can no longer tell which of the three would be the cruelty. She writes one more full line, and then there is only the count, climbing in the margin to the end. I think it is the next one who can read. I don't have an answer. I looked for one. There isn't. What there is a box that went to a place that burned, and a diary in a county record, and the plain fact that somewhere south of Clarksville, in the spring of 1875, there was a woman who could read, and a letter already on its way to her, with no postmark on it, addressed in a stranger's hand, that no office ever carried.